Good evening. We will be talking more about an element with more details. That is subtle and difficult to understand in human beings, at least at first. Those who take the philosophy course with us know that we approach will as part of the human being's constitution. Just like the physical body and the emotional body, it may seem a bit strange. Will is not a very clearly defined concept. And today we will see just how practical this concept really is. It is not distant from reality, and it greatly defines these more concrete things. The denser things are more easily perceived by the senses, but they are an echo of the more subtle ones. Since we cannot see the more subtle aspects, we tend to attribute things, the movement of things, to material causes. Material causes generate material consequences. And in truth, the entire material world is an echo of something more subtle, and will is the most powerful force acting upon the universe, both within human beings and beyond them. In this image, I brought a symbol, because in myths and in all the fundamental concepts of philosophy, they are expressed through symbols. The symbol of will, par excellence, the sword. In the myth of King Arthur, it is Excalibur. Arthur, portrayed in that beautiful film Excalibur, which, to me, is the best film about the myth of King Arthur, based on the novel by Thomas Malory. When Arthur becomes king, the Lady of the Lake gives him Excalibur rising above the waters. This Excalibur, which is associated with human will, when it is above the waters, represents the will of a king. The waters symbolize the horizontality of the material plane. When the sword is submerged in the waters, he possesses only material desires. The sword above the waters, he now possesses a spiritual will, which is not tainted by selfishness, is already capable of thinking about humanity, is able to go beyond his own personality. And whoever possesses this kind of will is a king. Even if he is not a political king of a society, he reigns over himself. He reigns over his impulses, over his instincts. This central driving force of the Arthurian myth, the sword. The well-forged, resilient sword pierces through matter. Where there is a will, there is a way. Well, talk about this. It is a symbol. Let's understand it through various examples. What is human will? And why is it the greatest power, the most divine, of all the powers that dwell within the human being? All right, so let's begin. Plato, whenever he speaks of any concept, he has a purpose in doing so, so he'll do the same. He reminds us how much words have been emptied of meaning. Will, then, is top of the line. I think the only word more misused than will is love. Love really doesn't mean anything anymore. But will is among the top 10, because will has become a synonym for desire, and not just any desire. If I want to have an ice cream, I can, am willing. And I have money in my pocket. I don't say I want to have an ice cream, I just go and have it. When I say, im with vante de tomar sorvit, usually, I'm not going to buy it, either because I'm feeling lazy, or am without money, or because I have a cold, or it's too high in calories, right? I really feel like having ice cream. What do you understand from that tone? It's not will, it's a frustrated desire. I'm not going to have the ice cream. This poor word will has suffered such severe erosion that it became associated with desires, and not always successful ones. Frustrated desires. This is the height of a word's decline. Will is not desire. That is the most important thing to understand. A conjunction to help us better grasp the concept of will. Since this word alone stands little chance in today's world, is its union with another noun, strength. Strength of will. Do you see how that already gives it a different tone? If you say, a person has will. Will for what? Will to go, to return, to rise, to fall. You'll interpret it as desire. But if you say, a person has strength of will, you'll understand that they are determined, who has goals, who won't give up. This conjunction, this articulation, already gives it a tone that's a bit closer. It brings the word closer to its original meaning, although this can sometimes lead to confusion. Sometimes we confuse strength with effort. A person who is dragging themselves to get things done, that's not a strong person. That's someone who isn't motivated. It's something else. It's complicated to define things. Philosophy is complex. It's a journey not only into the meaning of words, but into ourselves. We're not trying to intellectualize. We want to discover the will within us. That's the goal. All right? So let's go. When associated with the word strength, not effort, it becomes clearer. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Willpower. Someone who has willpower is determined. Reaches their goals, they get a little closer. Continuing on. Within us, we have many types of strength, and it's important that we become aware of that. Doesn't passion give us strength? Don't people become obsessed? Turn the world upside down for a passion? A person who is completely choleric, enraged, out of control. Don't they have strength? Sometimes it even leads to physical violence, doesn't it? Violence has strength behind it. How can a weak person be violent? But it's not the strength of will. That's something entirely different. Will is not an explosive force. Boom, I got into a fight with you. Boom, I chase after a passion. No, these explosive forces are momentary and unconscious. Boom, then I regain control. Boom, and soon I recover from that crazy passion, that obsession. Will is lucid and persevering. It is enduring. The strength when related to will is lucid and lasting. It is not that. It is always ascending toward the goal. Therefore, it is a completely different application of strength. Those who have strength of will are conscious. They know where they want to go and keeps moving forward. It is not someone who is enraged or driven by passion. The word strength also needs to be clearly defined. Why is it important for us to understand this? Don't be offended by what I'm about to say, but you'll have to admit that I'm right. Our culture is a factory of weak individuals. Am I wrong? It's the law of least effort. Everyone's dream is to work as little as possible and earn as much as possible. Isn't that right? It's the law of least effort. It's complacency. People love comfort far more than they love growth. It's a system that produces values which make people weak. In the life of a weak person, the only kind of strength they know is explosive strength. It's like my little cat, very funny because she's completely peaceful. Only my daughter can get the cat to lose her temper. She starts provoking the cat. She teases the cat. The cat walks away. She follows. Teases, walks away, provokes the cat. After 15 or 20 minutes of provoking the cat, poof, scratches her and disappears. I say, you are the perfect example of what today's culture does to human beings. It weakens them until they accumulate so much stress, so much pressure. They commit an act of violence and then disappear, returning to their passivity. These are the only forces society recognizes, passionate or angry. It doesn't recognize different strength. It doesn't nurture it. It's not that it doesn't exist. Happens sometimes. But it doesn't encourage this kind of conscious and consistent strength. Do you understand? If a person possesses it, it's because they had to build it within themselves. Because it's not something one receives as part of their upbringing. I gave you the example of the mountaineer because it gives us an interesting image. So there he is, trying to climb the Himalayas. Okay, that's a bit extreme. Let's say a smaller mountain. He throws his rope, puff. He makes sure it's firmly anchored, it can't be uncertain. Then he grabs the rope, wearing gloves, prepared so he doesn't get hurt. He pulls up Iona, with rhythm, without haste, and without pause, pulling, getting closer and closer to the goal. Do you see that? So, willpower, in our context, is made up of the mountaineer's two actions, which are a firm and clear decision at the top, I want to get there, and then perseverance and consistency rhythm. Everything in the manifested world is sustained by rhythm. Your heart sustains your life through rhythm. Your lungs, every movement of your body, all follow a rhythmic pattern. Life is sustained by rhythm, which is made up of two elements, perseverance and consistency. Perseverance, to do it always, without haste and without pause. Consistency, to always remember why you are doing it. Because if you don't, you fall into mechanical repetition. Have you seen Modern Times by Chaplin the Bolt Tightener? Mechanization. He is persistent, not consistent. He no longer remembers why he's doing it. So, will, in our realm, is a decision made on the mental plane, and perseverance and consistency on the physical plane, climber. In this way, he keeps climbing, and getting closer to his goal. It's important to realize that, in our times, if we applied this to mountaineering, it would kill the mountaineer. We have what is called the sophism of doubt. If you say, I am certain of where I want to go in my life, people will say, wow, how rigid you are, how dogmatic. Modern man is a child of doubt. He must doubt everything. Look, just between us, only us and the listeners, let this be known. Doubt is perfectly appropriate when it comes to means. Imagine this mountaineer. What can he doubt? He's pulling on his rope. Well, there's an indentation in the rock here. I can step here. Or there, where it's a bit rougher, seems more secure. Which is better, here or there? These kinds of questions are valid. He is choosing how to take each step. But can he afford to doubt where his rope is anchored up above? Should he anchor it here? Wouldn't it be better over there? He keeps changing it, doesn't secure it properly, and boom down into the abyss. Do you see? We live in a society of insecurity, where we believe we must doubt everything. Someone who accomplishes something great in history channels will, determination, perseverance, and consistency. Is that person constantly doubting whether they truly want it? Did Albert Einstein ever question whether he was a physicist or a biologist? Would he have achieved what he did if he had that doubt? Did Leonardo da Vinci wonder whether he was a doctor or an artist? Would he have done what he did if he had that doubt? Imagine turning back halfway through the journey. Who would be able to do something great like that? Now, how many times must Einstein have questioned the best method? That's natural. It's part of the process. How many times did Leonardo da Vinci change his medium painting on walls, painting on wood? He may have questioned which medium was best, but he never doubted his purpose. The human purpose that guides life, the ideal, must never be put into question, or else we'll never get anywhere. You move this way, that way, and in the end, everything cancels out and you haven't moved at all. Understand that this is one of the most debilitating elements of the will. The lack of a clear sense of purpose in life, the failure to firmly anchor your climbing rope, the absence of an ideal. Along the way, there's room for all kinds of doubts in order to find the safest path. But if your goals keep changing, you won't get anywhere. So, here are some important points regarding what we call will. Perseverance, consistency that is, rhythm on the physical level. Identity, decisiveness on the mental level, knowing where I want to go, and certainty about where I want to arrive. But what if I change along the way? What do you mean? Is it possible that, in the middle of life, you might discover that fraternity isn't good for you? Or that justice isn't good for you? Is that even a possibility? We're talking about human ideals, not temporary projects. A mountaineer anchors their rope as close as possible to the summit of the mountain. Not nearby. Why anchor it nearby if their goal is to climb? We're not talking about things that leave room for doubt along the way. We are talking about human ideals, not projects. And without ideals, it becomes difficult to rise. A law of gravity also exists in the psychological realm. Without ideals, it's more likely that we descend. Right? Because it takes effort to rise, positive effort. A lot of determination, and if we lack that, the natural tendency is to fall. So, the sophism of doubt weakens our will. As I mentioned before, ours is a society that glorifies weakness. I was just commenting on this a little while ago. Heroes. Plato recommended that a person have a personal hero to remind them of how great they can become. The idols our culture produces are, in general, weak. Most of the time, they fall below Will-Wise's average person. The father who fights every day to overcome his circumstances. They are generally weak. This reveals a kind of worship of weakness. The more comfortable and convenient life is, with fewer challenges, the better. We were speaking about the one who makes an effort. It's one thing to have strength, and another to be someone who strives. Is striving a bad thing? No, it's good. Worse is the one who doesn't even try, who does nothing. But there's a difference between someone who is dragging themselves, channeling every bit of energy just to get something done, and someone who is truly motivated. If you saw Leonardo da Vinci leaning over his canvases, they say he would go up to 3 nights without remembering to sleep, 3 days without remembering to eat. Would you say he was a motivated person or just someone making an effort? The one who merely makes an effort is dragging themselves to get things done. They're not giving up, but the motivation isn't there. Do you get it? I remember that many years ago, we always held gatherings at New Acropolis. And in the spring, we would organize some artistic competitions, more for fun and camaraderie than for anything else, which we called the Spring Games. We played chess, held small athletic events, swimming, things like that. And when I joined New Acropolis, I was quite young, and I took part in a race just for fun. I had never run before, and I never ran again after that. And it was truly very funny. My athletic career ended right there. My philosophy teacher at the time, who is now the national director, when I passed by the track, he said something to me. Lean forward, and if you have to fall, fall forward. Because he said I was running like this. This expression of our body, when you're running like this, or doing something like this, what is your body saying? I don't want to go, I'm being forced. Do you see how this is the image of someone just pushing through? My goodness, when is this going to be over? Do you know anyone truly talented, truly motivated, who does something like that? There's a body language at play here. There's a strong resistance within me, but even so, I'm trying. So, willpower is not about effort, it's not about exhaustion. And here comes an important element. I've placed it a little further ahead. Well, look at this definition in just a moment. The difference between excitement and enthusiasm. A motivated person has enthusiasm. A person who is pushing themselves beyond their limits has excitement. Well, look at that difference in just a moment, all right? So let's go. Let's imagine so that we can understand the concept of will. I mentioned to you at the beginning, will is an internal element. It exists within us. It is one of the components of the human constitution. It's difficult to perceive this. That's natural because we hardly ever engage with it. We clearly perceive that we have a physical body. We perceive that there is an energy that flows through our physical body. We perceive that we have emotions. We perceive that we have a mind. The Indian tradition says that each of these is a body. Physical body, energetic body, emotional body, and mental body. And that each of these bodies has its own motivations. The energetic body might want to rest. The physical body, perhaps, I don't know, might want to go for a walk. The emotional body feels longing. The mind is curious. Each one has its own motivations. So, I was speaking here about the motivations of the mind. Curiosity, a kind of knowledge that doesn't want to commit. It wants to know what's inside the box. Have you seen this? If I say you can touch anything here at the school, except for that one box over there, which you can't open, what will happen in your mind? Nothing else will matter, only that box. This curiosity to see what lies behind things, inside things, without committing to anything, is a more fleeting interest of the mind, more superficial. Emotions, in general, are drawn to what is pleasant, to what is attractive, or they fear whatever threatens them in some way. They react based on these attractions or on the things that repel them. And so it goes, our energies naturally gravitate to the things that nourish them. Our body prefers the path of least resistance. Now, when we look at certain heroes in history, for example, a Joan of Arc, who did what she did. What was the inner force within her that was calling for that? Was her mind simply curious to know what war was? I don't think so. The mind doesn't have a kind of curiosity that would lead to such deep commitment. Could it have been her emotions that enjoyed risking her life? Notice that probably not either. Emotions don't tend to favor such dangerous things. They have an instinct for self-preservation. There was something within her that wanted to liberate France, to do good for humanity, to bring hope to people, to give France a king, to offer a heroic ideal to those around her. Do you understand that? It wasn't the mind, nor the emotions, nor the physical body, nor the energetic body. It's something very subtle. It's Excalibur rising from the water. It's a higher kind of need that we carry within us. It's very interesting to realize this, that heroes could be, like Joan of Arc was, in a physically deplorable condition, being humiliated, and her emotional state probably wasn't very good either. And yet she felt fulfilled and that she had done her duty. There is something within us that is above all these things, and that seeks things greater than those things. We have a vehicle within us that the Indian tradition called Atma, or will. It finds fulfillment in doing great things, things greater than our own self-interest, greater than our own selfishness. And when this will is great, is strong, it asserts itself over these bodies, in such a way that the will says to the mind, figure out a way to make this happen. To the emotions it says, find a way to like what I must do, because it'll do it. Joan of Arc didn't wait to enjoy war, she probably didn't like it. But she went anyway and learned to appreciate it along the way. She didn't wait for her mind to be interested or curious about war. She went anyway, because she felt it as a duty and it wasn't for herself. So we have a much more subtle element that asserts itself over everything below it. Let's talk a bit about that. So, will asserts itself over the mind and emotions and compels them to find ways to move forward. We can see this in heroes. A hero, per Plato's definition, is precisely that being who managed to rise slightly above the average level of humanity. A person aligning successfully all their inner vehicles in a single direction. It is a force, a capacity for accomplishment. They did not live solely for themselves, and therefore, they made history. Let's look at a few more details to understand this better. So, if there is something dominating my mind, my emotions, it's a sign that there is a fifth floor within me, something beyond what is material, fleeting, and destined to pass. I mentioned this in a previous lecture, reflecting on it throughout our lives. Our physical body today is not the same body we had at 10 years old, nor is our energy, our emotions, or our thoughts. They are different, but there is something that remains throughout our entire life. Subtle, that provides a thread of connection, a sense of continuity, that allows you to know. That body is not the same, those emotions are not the same, but it was still me there. Something remained, as if it were a deep gaze looking at the world from the depths of your consciousness, and demanding that you be human, that you fulfill your mission, that you declare why you came. When we begin to listen to that voice, which the Tibetan tradition calls the voice of the silence, we begin to discover a subtle and higher potential within the human being, which is what we call the will. Any determined person who indeed made history, through their life story, you can see that they heard that voice. The circumstances were impossible, no one should have prevailed, and yet they did. No one should have been able to overcome such circumstances, and yet they did. Sometimes will defies logic. You've probably heard of those ancient battles, where it's said that 300 men fought against thousands, and managed to prevail an army half the size of the other emerged victorious. We tend to say no, that must be a legend. But it seems at times such things occurred in history. There were men who did such extraordinary things that we ask ourselves, how? Because they possessed powers that were not ordinary. And these powers were not paranormal or magical. They were simply a will forged of iron, of steel like Excalibur, capable of piercing deeper into matter. Remember Excalibur embedded in the stone. Where there is a will, there is a way. When a sword is well forged, it can cut through even the hardest rock. That stands in its path. There is no matter capable of resisting it. And most importantly, if there was once a man who was capable of doing this, then that same potential lies dormant within you. This is the law of the human condition, for both good and evil. Have you ever thought about that? If someone does something extremely brutish, barbaric, and heinous, be careful perhaps that beast is also asleep within you. And if you are aware of it, you can master it. If you think you're too pure, watch out. When we turn our backs on our problems, we risk them catching us from behind. To know everything that exists within us, medieval alchemy called this the peacock's tail. To see that everything that exists in the world also exists within us, that is what maturity meant to them. So, the will synthesizes human powers and channels them in a single direction. I gave the example of a locomotive. I spoke to you about 4 bodies: the physical body, energy, emotions, and the mind. Imagine a locomotive. I have a healthy physical body. My body is fine. My energy is fine. I'm not sick, not lacking energy. My immunity is good. I'm doing fine. I even enjoy doing things, so emotionally I'm okay too. I even know how to do it. I've read some books. I've seen others doing it, so knowledge is fine. Here we have the conditions of the body, energy, emotions, and the mind. Do you know people who have all 4 of these conditions and still don't do anything? You realize that having the tools is not enough. You need the steam engine here. You need something that drives all of this forward. You need will. There are people who have all these conditions and still do nothing. And sometimes the opposite happens. Someone who only has will ends up creating all these conditions. Do you remember Stephen Hawking, the physicist? There are people who have none of that, only will, and they build those train cars. They create those conditions. That's why will is the most divine and powerful thing we possess. Because it rises above circumstances. We find this strange. I don't want you to think that I'm criticizing today's culture just as a cliché or out of habit. We need to recognize the world of opinions we live in. We've reached a point in history where literature, psychology, sociology, all said the same thing, that human beings are a product of their environment, that humans cannot rise above their surroundings. One day, sitting with my students, we listed about 10 schools of thought, from the second half of the 19th century to the early 20th century, all saying the same thing. A true form of brainwashing. It's interesting that when this reached Brazil, at the end of the 19th century, even literature fully embraced it, which gave rise to naturalism. The Tenement, the Mulatto, the Meat by Julio Ribeiro. Everything turned toward that, echoing Portugal, echoing Europe. And yet we had a man, the grandson of enslaved people, orphaned by his mother. His father died when he was very young, and he was raised by a stepmother, who was very humble, working as a laundress, who never had the opportunity to set foot in a school, was self-taught. By the age of 17 or 18, he was already an intellectual who even mastered the French language. He got his first job at a newspaper and published his first poem. Joaquim Maria Machado de Assis, considered one of the greatest intellectuals of the Portuguese language, is not just a figure of Brazil. Imagine, he lived among many young intellectuals of the time, all of whom followed the determinist school of thought. Machado de Assis was ahead of them, and there was a trend at the time. They didn't see the human being, they saw the trend. And they believed in that. How could they believe that man is shaped by environment? And you? How did you come to be who you are? Would you rather believe in an opinion than in a concrete fact, flesh and blood, standing right in front of you? That is massification. We still live very much under this massification, where we doubt the human being's ability to shape and build themselves. So when we don't believe in will, it becomes harder to channel it. Consciously channeling it is already challenging. Without believing it exists, one of the greatest losses a person can suffer is to doubt humanity itself. And any school of thought that fosters this kind of skepticism cautious with it. It weakens us. It is profoundly debilitating. Growing while believing in yourself is already difficult. If you don't believe, forget it. It won't work neither in yourself nor in humanity. If there is anything that stands as a testament to philosophy, it is to never lose faith in humanity. All right? So, continuing. I was speaking about the will's ability to synthesize human potential. There's an example I always use. That helps us understand this a bit better. Our education. Especially in the early years later on, not so much, is designed to help us gain basic control over our physical body. Soon you'll have to teach them to sit, to crawl first, right? First they sit and crawl. I don't know. I don't remember anymore. They crawl, sit, then start taking their first steps. Then they begin to use utensils, then a pencil. Basic control over the physical body. That's very important. This allows us to do many things. But generally, from that point on, we don't make much effort to master anything else. Now, what does having basic control over the physical body enable me to do? I say, legs, take me to the door. Where do they take me? To the door. I say, legs, take me to the fan. Where are they taking me? To the fan. Now imagine if I didn't control my legs, and I wanted to reach the door, what would I do? My legs go one way as I drag myself, cling to the floor, ask help from someone else. How long would it take to get there? So I save a lot of time because I can do that, right? I can turn to my emotions and say, emotions, this is noble, just, and good, appreciate it. Do they obey? I say to my mind, mind, I need to understand this concept, focus on it. Does it obey? If I could master my emotions, my mind, with the same ease that I control my legs when I walk, where could I go? What kind of human being would I be? Do you understand? To take all of human potential and channel it like a laser beam in one direction. It would be a force of nature. The human being multiplies their capacity for achievement, for building themselves and the world. It's not each vehicle going its own way, but all four aligned like a laser, in a single direction. When a person develops this capacity of will, they become capable of that. Precisely because, as I've mentioned in other talks, you cannot master what you identify with. There must be a disidentification of consciousness in order to have a certain mastery over things. If I believe that I'm this, I will not be able to master it. If I believe there is something beyond this within me, then I have a chance to master it. Do you remember the example I used to give you? Once again, my little pets, which have already inspired many philosophical reflections. My daughters have always had pets. It's fun, your pet, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, treats each member of the household differently. They know exactly who they're dealing with. They're incredibly clever. I remember when my daughters were little, they would roll around on the floor with the dog, and you couldn't tell where the dog ended and the child began. He adored them, but he didn't obey them in the slightest. I have great affection for dogs. I really like them. But he respected me. I like him, but I'm a human being, and he's a dog. I maintain a certain sense of detachment. That gives me a certain authority, and he respected me. With them, nothing. He adored them, but didn't respect them. This applies in all areas. When Gibran speaks about education, he says, we have a child, and we think that the best thing a father can do for his child is to be his little buddy, rolling around with him on the floor, not physically, but psychologically. A child needs a father. That role is essential to their psyche, and when you become just a buddy, who will be the father? That identification makes you lose the ability to guide them, because they won't accept that guidance. A horizontal kind of guidance. The child will expect something that comes from above. So, a man who is completely identified with these four aspects, body, energies, emotions, and thought, will not master any of them. It's as if he represses himself. There must be some identity above, some kind of determination that allows him to have self-mastery when he chooses. That's why we used to say that the strength of a passion is different from the strength of the will. The strength of the will is controlled and conscious. The strength of passion is completely uncontrolled. Will is self-control, control over ourselves, which allows us to align all our energies and become a force, an extraordinary capacity for achievement. The human being is a force of nature, and now we'll enter another concept, the concept of power. It's complicated, isn't it? So many words to define in a single day, but it's necessary, because it is closely related to the will. Iona, I was talking to you about these two other words, enthusiasm and excitement. What is excitement like? Have you ever noticed when we watch a movie, especially those more sentimental ones, the overly sweet ones, like soap operas on Globo? What happens? You get excited, then it fades, excited again, then it fades. Then comes the tear-jerking scene at the very end. 10 minutes later, you're eating popcorn and have already forgotten about it. Isn't that right? Excitement is cyclical. It's like a roller coaster. Enthusiasm, on the other hand, is something a person can sustain throughout their entire life. Look at the great geniuses. Do you think Mozart ever woke up one day tired of music? Enthusiasm comes from entheos. It means to feel the divine within you. If you feel it, and you will feel it for the rest of your life. The will is considered divine. We'll talk more about that. It is a divine element within us. If you feel it, and you won't stop feeling it. And it will continue to motivate you throughout your life. Enthusiasm is not cyclical. It is a constant engine of life. And if it is, be mindful. It is what people commonly refer to as vibes. It's a powerful vibe. An emotional roller coaster, like a soap opera. Tearful at times, then bursting with laughter, then tearful again. In short cycles that change nothing, neither the world nor yourself. No one changes anything through excitement, but through enthusiasm, yes. All the people who made history had enthusiasm. Entheos, God within. Persevering and constant. Have you grasped the difference between the two? Persevering means to persist always, and being constant means remembering why you're doing it. Pause the scene. Why are you doing this? Because I want to be a just person. All right, you may continue. Pause the scene. Why are you doing this? That's true. Why am I doing this? Stop and reflect. You've fallen into mechanical routine like Chaplin's Modern Times. Do you see? Because it will only help build you if it's a conscious act. And that forms the elements of enthusiasm. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, a very interesting 19th century philosopher, uses this phrase here as an excerpt. Will governs manifested universes in eternity. But what a complex phrase, right? What on earth does that mean? She goes on to say this, there are concrete things. This wall, for example, feels so solid, right? But will it still be here 100 years from now? Probably not, because these modern constructions aren't worth much. Have you ever seen a building last 100 years? Soon enough, it's full of cracks and leaks. So it's not truly concrete. Because it exists now, but soon it won't, and just a moment ago it didn't. They seem like fixed, solid things. But the corrosion of time takes everything away. She asks, what is truly real in things, since material objects are constantly disappearing? The things of the material plane. What is real in things? Is that they are traces of the will of those who created them. There are only two possibilities, at least for now. Later on, who knows? In this current stage of humanity's evolution, you can see the traces of divine will and the traces of human will. In other words, what was built by human hands and what was created by the divine. And what is most real about things is this, because their physical form will eventually be lost. But the will of the one who created them will not fade, because true will does not fade. What fades is desire. Will, if it is true, if it is truly driven by inner passion, does not fade. So what is most real in things is the will of the one who created them, whether it be a star, whether it be a constellation, or whether it be a table. Then you might say, "No, you must be joking, Lucia, that's not true." You know why? This wooden table, I know who made it. It was Mr. Joao, from the corner. Poor man, he's a very good person, but he's an alcoholic. He didn't have any kind of divine will. He just wanted to earn a little money to buy his drink, so don't come to me with that talk. This table is not a trace of the will. Can't you say that to me? Isn't it hard to say if you know Mr. Joao? Or if you're just imagining Mr. Joao? Aren't there many Mr. Joaos out there in the world? Then he'll tell you this, look. Even desire is a distortion of the will that has fallen into matter. I was telling you that the horizontality of water represents the material plane. I mentioned, back at the beginning, the sword Excalibur, that when it is in the lake, that is, within the material world, it is merely desires for material things. When it rises from the waters, it becomes fraternity, it becomes compassion, it becomes commitment. Excalibur outside the waters is will. But in any case, man moves through a reflection of the will within the material plane. If there were no will at all, even if it's distorted into desire, Mr. Joao wouldn't have made this table. I can prove that to you. We've probably all heard this kind of example, which unfortunately is becoming more and more common. Kant spoke about this. There are 3 types of action. First, action out of duty, which is that pure will, committed to things that are not selfish. Second, action from desire. This is the selfish one that wants things for itself. If I do this, I get that. And then there are cases so extreme that the person won't even move out of desire. They want things, but only if you give them. Are you familiar with this? What we call apathy, which is the extreme of human frailty, is an almost total absence of will, even in the form of desire. Have you ever heard of people who are in a state of begging, living on the streets, asking for money just to survive? Then someone comes along, finds them a small job, gets them into a house, secures a salary, offers dignity, but the person gives all up because it's too much effort. It's easier to get things for free. Have you heard of that? They won't move even out of desire, let alone out of will. This can happen. A human being can reach such a state of apathy that they won't act even out of self-interest. All right? So it's important that we understand this issue. The trail of things, the things that exist in the world, require at least a minimum amount of will to be produced. Mr. Joao, even with all his moral issues, even if he's an alcoholic, is still capable of making some effort to build this table. Then you might ask, what's the difference between pure will and desire? How long do you think this table will last? A simple wooden table like this? I don't know. I'd say, just a few years. Who here has been to Egypt and seen the pyramids? Weren't they built by human hands? In Cairo, in fact, there's a saying that goes, "Everyone fears time, but time fears the pyramids." It's truly astonishing, Iona. The estimated date of when those were built, it just keeps going further and further back. I don't know, 4, 5 millennia at least. How can a human being leave such a massive footprint? Tell me, what kind of will brought that into existence? Will it be worn down by time one day? Yes, but look at how it defies time. Is that the trace of a dwarf or of a giant? What kind of will creates something like that? Here in Brasilia, there's a fighter jet air base. Here in Annapolis. And every now and then supersonic jets fly across the sky. Have you seen them? They leave a trail that, sometimes, we can still see long after just a line in the sky. And a small propeller plane, will it leave a trail too? Yes, but ITLL lasts only seconds. All leave traces, but briefly. Once it's passed, there's nothing left. So when you look up at the sky and see a lasting trail like that, was it a fighter jet or a small prop plane flew by? And the traces we leave in life, are they like a jet or a Tecatico? When we walk past a building under construction, has that ever happened to you? And then, years later, you pass by again and see that building that you once saw being built, now full of cracks and leaks, already showing problems. What kind of trail is that, a Cotico or mirage? Do you see what I mean? In other words, by your works I shall know you. What kind of will do you have? Is it a purely material desire? Will it leave a lasting mark? Or will it be temporary, fleeting? Is it a powerful will, one that will make history, that will build the world and build yourself? And then there are those who leave no trace at all, because not even desire is enough to move them. Do you see? By your works I shall know you. It is a testimony in the world of the level of will you are capable of channeling. This is something important for us to understand. So I was telling you about this last point. What are we leaving behind that is truly grand? What works? What level of will are we able to channel? It's an unsettling question, but an important one. How great are our traces? How lasting? It's important that we learn to see ourselves through our traces and not through our fantasies. I think I'm doing a lot. Look at your traces. It's an act of courage. It's self-knowledge. It's important to look. When we see, we can generate an attitude of transformation. Where there is a will, there is a way. This is a very interesting saying. In other words, sometimes, in an absolutely adverse situation, there is a person who channels the will and creates something sensational, something no one expected. Have you ever noticed that, sometimes, certain societies manage to drain swamps, irrigate deserts, and sometimes a person is stopped by a mosquito? Isn't that so? So, it's not the circumstances that prevent us. It's the person who blocks themselves. Circumstances become an excuse. If one person was able to overcome them, this is possible in all humans. Where there is a true will, there is a way. I don't see any path at all. You don't see it now, but soon you will, because I already see it. That's what a person of will says. A week ago, I watched a documentary. Something simple, yet striking, Iona. The story of a man very close to us, from the last century, who was a young man from the countryside, a farm boy, named Walter Elias Disney. You have no idea the hardships this young man went through, and what he was able to overcome to achieve what he did. It's remarkable. He was a man of true will. Iona. He went bankrupt 3 times in his life, yet said, "It's going to work." And he started all over again, until it worked just the way he envisioned it. Not once did he doubt. A force of determination truly impressive. Iona. And you might look and say, "I don't see anything." But a man of will sees. Where there is a will, there is a way, and he never doubts it. No matter how adverse the circumstances may be, he doesn't feel defeated, feels challenged. Oh, really? Let's see. It didn't work this way. Just wait and see how it's going to work now. And he grows stronger and stronger through adversity, just like our body serves as an example for us. Grows stronger when it beats a virus. That one won't affect it again. Isn't that right? It builds immunity. Our psyche could learn from that. So, as I mentioned to you earlier, where there is a will, there is a way. Now imagine this. I'll give you 2 examples, one of which we've already used. Have you ever heard of Aristotle Onassis? Onassis, I know of him because I'm a big fan of a singer named Maria Callas, and they were married for a time. Onassis was a man who went hungry. He had to bury his own parents, who were killed by the Turks. He went through terrible hardship, and he had an extraordinary level of determination. But what was Aristotle Onassis' goal? Do you know what it was? To be the richest man in the world. That was either. Do you think he had some kind of metaphysical goal? To be the richest man in the world. Now take Joan of Arc, whom we've talked about. She had an overwhelming will, but what did she want? To make history, to give people hope, to free France. to help the French have a dream, to have a king. She had the ability to dream and the ability to shape, to make things real. She could see on the spiritual plane. She had a pure will. Onassis only had vision on the physical plane. He wanted to forge paths here. But do you notice that when society is very weak, here comes a saying my grandmother used to love: in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Doesn't a man like that stand out? Because people are very weak, so when someone is truly determined, even if only for earthly matters, it draws attention. Do you realize how rare it is to find a truly determined person? Even if it's only for material interests, he forges ahead. This man became one of the richest in the world, forging ahead. Because people are becoming increasingly weak. So, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Imagine a will like that of Onassis, directed not toward himself, but toward humanity. What would he have accomplished? He wouldn't have built a fortune, he would have made history. He wouldn't have amassed great wealth, would have eased the suffering of many. But the power is the same, Excalibur underwater or Excalibur above water. So, a well-forged sword. In the interior of Italy, there is a tourist curiosity. A stone with a sword embedded in it up to the hilt. Villanova culture explains. No one knows how that sword was driven into the stone, because it's solid rock. And a very resistant rock at that. Which serves as a symbol of this ancient myth, which says the following. When our will is a well-forged sword, a well-tempered steel, there is no stone, no mineral, nothing in the world capable of standing in its way. Do you understand? Where there is a will, there is a way. The more well-tempered it is, the more resilient. The more it is able to overcome adversity. The sword embedded in the stone is a symbol of that. That's what Excalibur represents, a steel of fine temper. My grandmother used to say something. I've tried to figure out how she knew this. I never found out, and it will remain a mystery because she passed away years ago. She used to say, "Look, my daughter. Life will either sharpen you or wear you down. It depends on whether you're a good knife or a bad one." Later, I discovered that this is a popular saying, that life is like a whetstone. It will either wear you down or sharpen you, depending on the steel you're made of. I found that very interesting. In other words, for a sword, the harder the stone, the sharper it becomes. So, the sword is universally a symbol of will. The human will, capable of asserting itself and overcoming adversity. Will is the most spiritual element. The Christian concept of faith is very similar to this. Remember, the size of a mustard seed. You will say to this mountain, "Cast yourself into the sea," and it will do so. Remember that passage? If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, what kind of power is it that, even the size of a mustard seed, can command a mountain? The Christian concept of faith is, let's say, a different name for the same reality. This divine power that exists within human beings to transform mountains into plains, drain swamps, and irrigate deserts. To make history, to build oneself, and to change the world. Continuing with our little story. Pay close attention to this concept, because if this becomes clear to you, my evening will already be worthwhile. Imagine the problems we face in life. Picture a funnel. We enter into problems in many different ways. Imagine if we spent the rest of the evening listing out all the ways we've gotten ourselves into trouble in life. Various mistakes, moments of carelessness, mistaken beliefs, misguided attitudes toward life. You can enter a problem in countless ways. But there's only one way out: willpower. Is there any other way to get out of problems? Toad out? You'll just fall back into them, because the same cause that led you there will take you there again. There is no way out of problems except through willpower. This is a detail we need to understand. Imagine this. I actually found it funny when I was coming up here. In the middle of the hallway, there was literally a shoe print on the wall. Friends, he'll give an example of this today. Someone guessed it. Imagine there's a shoe print on this wall. Then I ask, Who did this? Let's investigate the parliamentary inquiry into the shoe print. Then I find out it was him. And what'll do with that? Nothing. Every time someone says, "This wall looks awful with that shoe print on it," he'll say, "It was him." Do you see that I found someone to blame, and the fact that I found a cause, a culprit, didn't give me enough will to act on the consequences? Did it solve anything? It solved nothing. On the contrary, it made me complacent. It became comfortable to live with it, because now I have an excuse. Understand this, let's adapt it to our psychological life. When I have a problem and I'll go looking for someone to blame, for causes, to make an analysis focused on the past, will that necessarily get me out of here? Sometimes it won't. Maybe it'll just give me a reason to feel more comfortable. I found someone to blame. Whatever the causes may be, for instance. In order to move forward, I need conclusions that are oriented toward the future. It doesn't matter how this came to be. What matters is that it's going to change now. I go inside, grab a bucket, a sponge, a cloth, and poof, it's done. I don't care who did it, but what I do know is that it's not going to stay that way. Do you understand that? Without this mindset, will you really move forward? Notice that it's not wrong to look for the cause of things. But don't rely solely on that to solve your problems. Because sometimes that leads to shifting responsibility and makes you complacent. Without will, no one gets anywhere. Do you understand? There is no other way to overcome problems. And there's another very curious factor related to this. When I move forward, instead of making countless and endless analyses of the past, I synthesize and plan for the future like a mountaineer. I throw my rope up and start pulling myself forward. If I need to understand the causes, there is an interesting phenomenon in the human being. It seems that nature supports those who are endowed with will, those who are determined, those who work positively in harmony with nature itself, because it brings to the surface of your consciousness exactly what you need to know in order to move forward. Have you noticed that? I'm trying to do something positive, productive, constructive, human. But I need to recall an element that happened in my childhood. That is blocking me, that is not allowing me to act well. Has it ever happened that something suddenly surfaced in your memory and you don't even know from where? Why? Because you channeled your will into action. And nature brings you the tools. That's where the story of fairy tales comes in. I really love that. I adore it. Fairy tales often carry this idea. The prince arrives in the kingdom. Mothers with small children know this. The prince arrives in the kingdom. The king says to him, "Save my daughter who is trapped in the claws of a dragon." What does the prince say? Who created this dragon? How did she end up there? Who failed to take proper care of this princess? Does he say that? I don't care who it was, but she's not staying there any longer. She won't, because he'll go now. Notice that this action of his, he's just a young man, just a boy, and the dragon is a dragon. This action of his positive, committed to something greater than himself, because there's no personal interest involved here. Have you ever seen a story where the prince says to the king, "Tell me, what do I get out of this? How much will you pay me? Is the reward worth it? Because depending on that, he'll go." But he doesn't go there because he has guarantees that he'll win the princess. Have you ever seen a story like that? Where the king says, "If you go and rescue her, I promise to give you her hand in marriage." I've never seen that in any story. Sometimes they fall in love along the way and return already committed, but that's not why he goes. He goes because he is noble, just, and good. He doesn't know if he's going to like the princess. He goes because he is noble, just, and good. It's a maiden held captive by a monster. You see, children have an intuition about this. I had 2 daughters, and they were obsessed with bedtime stories every night. It was exhausting because I didn't have that much imagination. Imagine saying that to a child. That the prince said, "How much will you pay me for this?" What child would want to hear a story like that? "Oh, that prince is no good, Mom, pick another one." Who would find any charm in a story like that? You see, the action must be noble, altruistic, meaningful, and aimed toward the future. And he, that young man, who was willing to face a dragon. At the beginning of the story, he didn't stand a chance, but as he keeps moving forward, the magical weapons begin to appear. Then he gives water to an old man and receives a magical secret that makes him invisible. Or he finds a cloak that, when he puts it on, grants him powers. Or he discovers a sword in the stone, right? He gains powers along the way. Do you know what that means? The magical weapons. They are your inner powers that nature gradually brings to the surface. It reveals them to those who are committed to life. Nature doesn't offer answers to those who dig through the past, but to those who commit themselves to the future. It equips you. When you stand before the dragon, you will be armed to the teeth and ready to triumph. Why? Because you were noble, altruistic, and committed to life. It gives you the magical weapons along the way. By the time you get there, you'll be prepared. Do you understand that? These are characteristics of fairy tales. They are deeply educational. And our children understand them. We're the ones who have forgotten. At least they should understand. Even children are becoming alienated in today's society, forced to mature too early. But in principle, a child has the symbolic structure to understand the nobility of the hero, the forward-looking synthesis, not sparing effort nor seeking for oneself. We arrive at this concept, which is the essence of the human will. You know the goal, the higher will, the one that belongs to heroes. It's what we call right action. It is pure will. A person who seeks absolutely nothing for themselves from what they are doing. They simply want to be human. He fulfills himself by doing what is expected of a human being. A plant fulfills itself through photosynthesis, an animal by following its instincts, and he fulfills himself by being noble. Justin Good seeks no reward, nor does he fear losing anything because of it. This is pure will, or action out of duty, or right action. It is the pinnacle, wisdom. It is the highest point of will that a human being can reach. I'm going to tell you a little story that is quite well known. I often share it in my philosophy classes, so some of you may already know it. But in any case, it's worth hearing again. There was a very wise master who was riding his camel up a mountain. It's an Arab story. And ahead of him was another traveler. Suddenly, that traveler's camel got spooked, and he was thrown into an abyss. But he didn't fall, he got caught, hanging from a branch. Then the wise man, who was coming behind, got off his camel and did everything he could to save that man. He tore his own clothes to make a rope, gathered branches, grabbed this and that. And he belonged to the Islamic tradition. And in Islam, the highest authority between man and God, who is Allah, is the angel Gabriel. Suddenly, the angel Gabriel appears and says, "Look, you have already shown enough virtue and wisdom to gain access to Allah's heaven. Come with me. You have already attained liberation." Then he looks at the angel, looks at the man hanging over the abyss, pulls the angel closer and says, "Listen, can't I trade Allah's heaven for a good piece of rope?" Do you understand what that means? One day I'll gain access to Allah's heaven, but right now, to be human. Do I need a rope or Allah's heaven? I have no desires. I'll think about that later. Right now, it's the rope. What is expected of a human being in that moment? The rope, do you see? The Indian tradition has another very similar story about a great warrior, very wise, Yudhishthira, who had won a great war and was a just and good man, who was seeking the gate to Indra's heaven because he was to be granted access. Just as there is Allah's heaven, this was Indra's heaven. He walked for years in search of this so-called gate. And along the way, he came across a little stray dog, dirty, skinny. And the dog becomes his companion. They go hungry together. They endure the cold together. They face hardships together for years. Until one day he finds the gate to Allah's heaven. There was an angel at the gate, a Gandharv, radiant and beautiful, who says, "Welcome, Prince. You've arrived. Come in. The god Indra is waiting for you." He begins to enter, joyful. "At last, I've made it." With his little dog, but then the angel says, "Hold on. That dog can't come in. Have you ever seen a stray dog in Indra's heaven? What disrespect. You may enter, but the dog stays behind." Then he looks at his little dog, a skinny, scruffy stray, who had been his companion through all those years of hardship. He thinks for a moment and says, "If my dog can't come in, he'll stay with him." He gives up Indra's heaven for the sake of his dog. And do you know what happens? The dog was Indra. If he had given up the dog for heaven, it would have meant he desired something more than virtue. So he wouldn't have been ready to attain it. Do you understand? If he gave up justice, fraternity, compassion, loyalty, and gratitude, for the sake of a desire, even if it were heaven, would not have been ready. Do you understand that? This is what they call right action. We get a little intimidated. Wow, I couldn't do that. But understand what we're talking about is a goal. We're not saying we're already there. We're talking about a goal. I always give an interesting example. Imagine someone who doesn't like the sun. They keep their door and windows shut. I don't want anything to do with the sun. I don't like the sun. Then one day, they decide to make peace with the sun and open their doors and windows. Do you realize that whether their windows were closed or open, is her distance from the sun still the same? But just by opening the doors and windows, doesn't the light already reach where she is? That's how we are with these ideals. Without taking a single step, just by saying, "One day I want to be like that," that already reaches you where you are. This is the nature of the human ideal, of human dreams. Do you see? Just the act of saying, "I want to," already changes your life right here. Of course, as you walk toward the sun, there will be more light. It's enough to place yourself in relation to it, open doors and windows. And that already allows it to illuminate your life where you are. This is very important to understand, so we don't fall into that mental escape of saying things are too far away. No. Far or near is very relative, but I'm in relation with them. Continuing. The will is evidently more powerful when directed toward human goals. That is, altruistic, noble goals rather than selfish ones. You might say, but Onassis was incredibly powerful and he had selfish desires. Just imagine if Onassis, with all that determination, had applied it to altruism and generosity. What could he not have accomplished? Because he built a fortune. But those who possess both determination and altruism make history. They leave a mark for 2,000, 3,000 years. Much of what we've discussed here comes from a simple philosopher named Plato. Do you know how long ago he lived? 2,400 years ago. And yet he is still here, constantly inspiring us. If he had only sought wealth, would he still be here after 2,400 years? The human will, when it is truly human, has spiritual goals. Altruism, generosity, justice, fraternity. It is the greatest power a human being can come to know. It is the most divine aspect that resides within a person. It is when a person fulfills themselves, blossoms like the Eastern symbol of the lotus. When they discover the will within themselves. An important element is the matter of discipline and order. The will is like a ray of light. To reach the world, it needs a channel. And that channel is discipline and order. Remember perseverance and consistency, rhythm, that all of life is sustained by rhythms. So it requires supporting tools beyond perseverance and consistency. It needs discipline and order, because otherwise, how can determination be channeled? If someone is disorderly, unable to organize even their own space or time, do you see how that light can't reach the world? I gave the example of Ulysses, which is interesting, but there are many others. When Ulysses returns home in the Odyssey, Penelope is surrounded by suitors, pressuring her, trying to make her accept them. He arrives in disguise and sends word that Penelope would marry the one who could string Ulysses' bow and shoot an arrow through several aligned openings and hit a target at a certain distance. And none of the suitors succeed. Then he, still in disguise, steps forward and succeeds. In other words, the will, represented by the arrow, must pass through several aligned openings, which symbolize order. In order to reach the target, which is your goal, if those openings were misaligned, the arrow would deflect and fail to reach its goal, no matter how powerful the will may be. In the midst of disorder, of chaos, it cannot reach the world. It's important to understand something. Order, both in time and in space, grants power. It clears the path for your will to reach the world. And here it's important to recognize something we'll talk about shortly. Order is a virtue. And virtues grant power. When a person uses these virtues in service of something spiritual, like the will, they build marvelous things, but when used in service of vices, does it still work? It works too. It's a tool. Doesn't organized crime exist? Don't they use order? Do you see? If they were disorganized, it would be much better. They would have less power. Kant says this, that these virtues can be used for spiritual purposes or not. And when criminals discover that virtues grant power, they become organized, they adopt method, they develop discipline, and they become more and more powerful. We're about to reach a rather harsh conclusion about this very soon. This issue of rejecting power, that's an interesting element. I find it quite amusing. It's like cutting yourself with scissors and saying, scissors are evil. Let's abolish scissors from the world. What do you mean? You're just clumsy. Power corrupts. Does power really corrupt? Or was the person just waiting for an opportunity, took hold of power, and used it for that purpose? We were just talking about Machado de Assis a moment ago. You might know a quote of his. Machado de Assis was great at provoking thought. He was very sharp and truly a philosopher, even if that's not widely acknowledged. There's a quote he wrote in a newspaper, a Marmota Fluminense, where he used to work. He was in his early 20s when he said She was truly remarkable. He wrote, the popular saying that opportunity makes the thief is wrong. Opportunity creates the crime. The thief is already made. Do you understand that? It refers to someone who hasn't developed values, who is driven by uncontrollable desires, who is a slave to instincts. If you give power to them, what do you think they'll do? Ah, power corrupts. How convenient. It's a great way to shift the blame onto something else. But how can we imagine, for example, a God without power, a weak God? What purpose would a weak God serve? Do you realize that power is the ultimate attribute of God? And that the closer we draw to Him, the more powerful we become? Power is the ability to be, to act, to build. Depending on who's behind the wheel, power can also become the ability not to be. To destroy, to violate, it all depends on who's driving. Is it the driver at fault or the steering wheels? Seem giving a ticket to the steering wheel. That would be nice, right? To find the steering wheel instead of me, the one actually driving. But fortunately or unfortunately, the DMV doesn't share that philosophy of life. Isn't that so? So power does not corrupt. Power is, above all, a divine attribute. And a person who grows naturally becomes more empowered. They can build themselves and the world around them. They can bring about transformation. It is a force adding value to life and others. It's absurd to say that power corrupts, because that belief weakens us. Beware of the ode to weakness, which is the song the world sings from all corners these days. Be careful. We glorify it as if the weaker you are, the smarter you seem, the more you succeed without effort. That becomes the goal. Beware of this ode to weakness. This institutionalization of weakness, complacency, and mediocrity, along with a lack of commitment, will lead to that cruel consequence I mentioned earlier. There's a quote by Benjamin Disraeli, who was a British Prime Minister. And like many clever British politicians, he was smart, perhaps not very ethical, but certainly clever. He once said something important. That a society only has a chance when good people are indeed as bold and courageous as the corrupt. Do you understand that? As bold as the corrupt, the morally weakened, the outlaws. They have an extraordinary level of determination. And what about the good person? They follow the path of least resistance. Just imagine, when you look at the Red Command, a criminal faction. Do you know at what age children start working for organized crime? At 7 or 8 years old, they become lookouts, delivering drugs. And they are required to have discipline, an exceptional level of efficiency. You might say it's terrible what they do to these children. And it is. But will that discipline, that efficiency, make them stronger? than the middle-class teenager who only knows how to sit in front of the TV pressing buttons. More capable of surviving a harsh situation. Do you see how discipline, efficiency, order, and the ability to rise above circumstances begin to empower that group, while the path of least resistance weakens the other? What happens when these two groups face each other? The middle-class kid who doesn't want to do anything, and the kid who was raised to endure any adversity, trained in guerrilla tactics. What would be the outcome? Virtues can be used as means for criminal ends. And they are. The mafia is highly efficient. Isn't efficiency a virtue? But used for what purpose? The problem is that good people are being educated to be weak. They have no organization, no determination, no channeling of life toward an idealistic purpose. It's the law of least effort. If you confront these two groups, it's a disaster. Do you see that? So understand that we are increasingly weakening what is good and strengthening moral corruption, because all these techniques are more present in those who support moral corruption than in those who stand for what is good, who are following a culture that says the easier, the better. The law of least effort. Disraeli says, when you confront these two groups, it will be a tragedy. Do you understand this? It's quite alarming, isn't it? It's important that we understand this. Look at this very significant and pressing statement, the issue of youth, which is very important because it's a problem within society. The child dreams of great heroes, of fairy tales. The adolescent, the preteen, wants to become that hero. It's the age of adventure. They want to live great experiences. They seek courage. They seek boldness. Have you noticed how much they love adventure movies? They want courage. They want boldness. In a society where the law of least effort prevails, where comfort is valued far more than personal growth, who is the boldest and most daring figure they see? The drug dealer. Because the people they see around them are all very complacent, with no spirit of self-improvement. Then parents face that dilemma: how can I keep my child from being influenced by bad company? With this deep need for challenge, for bold individuals, generally speaking, who are the bold ones in our society? I mentioned this during the lecture on education by Gibran. The best way to protect young people is to become someone they admire. Have dreams. Commit yourself to life. Let them see something great in you. A will to become better, a will to leave a luminous trail in the world. Be great and good, and they will admire you. And your opinion will carry 10 times more weight than anyone else's. Do you understand? There is no more effective way than this. I don't know of any. Channel the will. And that will become a luminous trail that will draw the attention of the youth who come after. It will open the way. They are searching for light. If you have it, they will follow you without the need for pedagogical speeches. The best thing we can do for those we love is to grow as human beings. Only then can we ensure that we leave something meaningful for them. This is Platonic, and it is a reality. There is nothing better we can do for those we love than to awaken what is most divine within us. To be determined, persevering, constant, and altruistic a will that rises above the waters. A will that commits itself to the human ideal, that fulfills itself within, that fulfills itself in being human, which is a great gift, a true wonder. May we unwrap this package, the human condition, see what nature has given us, and truly live. And, in the end, a life without will. You look inside a human being, and it is a cemetery of dreams brought down by weakness. That is heartbreaking to witness. When we fail to persevere in something, we must be very careful with that, from a psychological point of view, even with small things. When I say, on Monday, he'll start this or that, it's very common with dieting. It always starts on Monday, and it never actually starts on Monday. Even with trivial things. When you say, I'm going to do it, be careful. Don't bluff with yourself. He'll meet her on Monday. If I don't show up, she'll manage. I'm not irreplaceable, she'll find someone else. But I can't manage without myself. I need to trust myself. I need to believe in myself. If I repeatedly break my commitments, break my word, I'll lose faith in myself. And that is incredibly hard to recover. Do you understand? Other people can replace you, but you can't replace yourself. You need to believe in yourself. And a constant inability to sustain your dreams will erode your self-belief, which is something very difficult to reverse. That person who, in their home, has a ballet slipper hanging in a corner. What's that? Oh, I decided to study ballet, but I got a pain in my calf, and after a month I gave it up. You look in another corner and see a painter's palette. What's that? I decided to start painting, but the smell of the paint gave me allergies, you know? Then I went to 2 classes and quit, then something else, then another thing. You look around, even outwardly, their life is a graveyard of dreams cut down by what? By a lack of will. Be careful. This is someone who, when they say, I'm going to do it, their own conscience replies, here you go again with that same thing. I have better things to do. You're silly. You're not going to do anything and you know it. In other words, they no longer have solid ground to launch themselves into the future. All right, so a person deprived of will turns themselves into a graveyard of human dreams cut down along the way. It's very difficult to be happy like that. So the synthesis of all this, because will is also synthesis, it's important to understand that will is more than just a desire. Will is God within us, it is enthusiasm, entheos. It's not a matter of, I'll see if I can develop it. It's a vital matter of life. Know yourself. Build yourself. Live as a human being. That's why we came here. If we don't do that, then what are we doing here? Will was a fundamental issue in all schools of philosophy throughout history, yet today we don't know what that word means. It's curious, this loss of focus. The human being is no longer the most important aspect of human life today. To know oneself, to master oneself, to live as a human, these are no longer seen as the most important things. They haven't ceased to be important, we've simply forgotten they are. But the unhappiness that this causes continues to happen. Do you understand that? If I ignore the law of gravity, things won't stop falling just because I don't know about it. They'll say, someone did something to make this fall. No, they didn't. It's the law of gravity. Human opinion does not shape reality. If I'm weak, that won't stop it from being true. If from corroding my life and my happiness, it'll simply be ignoring the real causes. Then I'll look for an external cause, an external culprit that makes things more convenient for me. So that's the idea. That's our summary for today. I hope it can spark some reflection in you, because the goal is to recover that original spirit of philosophy. Only the knowledge that makes us better is truly useful.